Now, I've tried desperately hard to love Samsung's regular Galaxy S series flagship smartphones. The S21 and S22 were beautifully compact Joe Pesci-sized blowers in a world filled with Dolph Lundgren mega bastards. But there was one small problem. The battery life was utter bollocks. And so it was with, shall we say, some trepidation that I slipped my SIM inside of the Samsung Galaxy S23, freshly launched for 2023 and yet another pint-sized blower. Although this time my spirits were somewhat uplifted by a pretty major change. You see, Samsung has finally seen sense and ditched that Exynos chipset, instead going all Qualcomm with the really rather clever Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which powers most 2023 flagship smartphones. But does that mean that the battery life is now less gash and the Galaxy S23 is actually the perfect compact smartphone? Well, it's a ruddy review, boy howdy. And please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. Cheers! So yeah, if like me you've got little hands and stubby fingers and you find that using a 6.8-inch smartphone is akin to grappling with a pissed off drunken bull with hands that are smothered in Vaseline, well, the Samsung S23 is like a breath of gloriously beautiful fresh air after emerging from a cave full of cheesy farts. And let's face it, your choices as far as compact smartphones go these days are pretty limited, especially now that Apple apparently can't be asked to do mini iPhones anymore. I've still got a deep, everlasting love for Asus's Zenfone 9, but this Galaxy S23 feels absolutely fantastic to clutch and play with. And while you do actually get a one-handed mode, it's not even strictly necessary on this thing. The Galaxy S23 looks pretty smart and it comes in a small range of colours. I'm particularly fond of the green one, gotta say, although at the same time that design is a wee bit bland. You see, unlike the Zenfone 9, there's no little design touches, no originality, no bits of flair. It's the smartphone equivalent of a pint of Heineken. It's perfectly inoffensive, but it's pretty much impossible to get excited about. Still, it's good to see that Samsung has lots of love for the baby seals and polar bears because the S23 is designed with the planet in mind. Apparently more bits of this generation of S-series smartphone are constructed from recycled materials. We're talking bottles, water barrels, even apparently the occasional fishing net. And both that front and the back end are constructed from Gorilla Glass Victus 2, fresh and new. And while the back end is still completely pristine after a couple of weeks of being banged about pretty badly, that front end, unfortunately, that display, I am noticing a few little nicks cropping up here and there, so I would highly recommend slapping on a screen protector just to make sure it doesn't get proper f***ed up and look really nasty. Oh, and if you fancy it, you can also take the Galaxy S23 in the shower or the bath with you, as it is IP68 water and dust resistant. Now, if you already have a Galaxy phone, you will be right at home with Samsung's OneUI 5.1 setup. This dishes up quite a few refinements, including plenty more automation opportunities, which Samsung is of course a big fan of. But besides that, it's the same old Samsung launcher that we all know and love. Or maybe not love, that's a bit of a strong word for it. It's the Samsung launcher that we know and kind of like when it's not being a total dick. Yeah, that's more like it. All of the usual foibles are still in there, like an abundance of Samsung apps that mirror the Android efforts, and the occasional wee bit of jank, including some Bluetooth related shindiggery. So occasionally, and for no apparent reason, when I'm streaming a bit of music to some speakers or headphones, the audio will just stop completely dead. That's definitely one of my favourite S23 features, that is. Oh, and then of course there's Bigsby. Good old cockin' Bigsby. But anyway, now is not the time for a Bigsby rant, and I've already done a gorgeous little video all about One UI 5.1, including all the shiny new bits. So go check that out for about another 10 minutes of me wanging on about all of this stuff. Hooray! When you grab yourself a Galaxy S23, you do have the option of stuffing up to 512 gigabytes of storage in there, and there's no micro SD memory card support, so if you do download a lot of movies or shoot a lot of video using your smartphone, you might want to consider upgrading to one of those higher options. After all, why not toss a bit more money at Sammy while you got the chance? Now, if you're worried that a 6.1-inch screen might not be big enough to enjoy the latest Hollywood blockbusters, well, don't worry, my eyes are old and crap, and I still found myself immersed in any shows and movies that I chucked onto this thing. The Galaxy S23 boasts the usual stunning AMOLED tech, and it's fully customizable, so you can tweak the color tones or have them adjust automatically based on the ambient lighting. There's no love for Dolby Vision here, but you've got HDR10 Plus video support, and that all looks proper lush with deep blacks, natural hues, plenty of sharp details smashed into each and every frame. And that panel gets as high as around 2000 nits when you boosted up to the maximum peak brightness, so you don't have to worry about not being able to see things when it's sunny out. You only have to worry about your eyeballs bursting into flames at the sheer awesome power of this thing. And while you don't get the latest LTPO tech here, the Galaxy S23 still supports refresh rates between 48 and 120 Hz. I just left it on the default adaptive mode and I found that everything was buttery smooth at all times. You've also got a pretty decent stereo speaker setup that's fine as long as you're not surrounded by awful noise, because it ain't the loudest. Complete with Dolby Atmos and Bluetooth 5.3 support, which will hopefully get patched soon so it's not quite as janky. Oh, and if you had hope in your heart that Samsung would bring back the humble headphone jack for the Galaxy S23 series, well, no, they didn't do that. So anyway, yes, as I may have already joyfully exclaimed quite a few times recently, Samsung's Galaxy S23 is powered by a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset, backed here by a not entirely generous 8 gigs of RAM. I did already bang on about the various features of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in a recent episode of TechSpert Weekly, but long story short, it's super powered, great for gaming, it's quite energy efficient as well, so it certainly doesn't heat up like an utter twat like the original Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. And you gamers are in for a bit of a treat. The Galaxy S23 holds a stable frame rate in Genshin Impact, even at those maxed out settings, with a lot more confidence than the Exynos letdowns of yesteryear. This mini marvel can game for hours, no worries at all, and only gets ever so slightly warm in the process. The only real issue I had was possibly caused by the compact design of the display, because occasionally in the heat of the moment I would frantically try and tap a certain attack or special attack button and it just wouldn't quite come off. Just a wee warning in case you like complex games with lots of on-screen buttons like Genshin Impact, Call of Duty, etc. I do wish that Samsung would add more dedicated gaming tools and features like Sony and Asus have done. You know, you got the likes of the priority mode here on the Galaxy S23, so you can concentrate on smacking 10 bells out of slimes and gribblies, but that's about it. But anyway, the real marvel of the Samsung Galaxy S23 is the battery life. While the capacity of the battery has only marginally increased over the previous generation to 3,900 mAh, the swap to that Snapdragon platform means you'll enjoy a full day of play, no worries. When I reviewed Samsung's Galaxy S21 and then the S22, it was the same bloody story. I'd make it to about 6 PM and then I'd get that dreaded low battery warning. So I'd have to make sure I only switched on the screen very briefly to check messages and such forth, and every time I did, my pulse spiked through the bloody roof because I could see the battery meter trickling down in real time. And yet, despite only that small boost to the battery size here in the Galaxy S23, not once did I fear running out of juice before the end of even a very long, very busy day. Sure, it's not quite as invincible as some other Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 smartphones that I've reviewed recently, but you know what, every single day I ended with around 10 to 20% battery life remaining, and that's with at least 6 hours of screen on time, plenty of media streaming, good bit of camera action as well as I was testing that bad boy out. So like the Zenfone 9, you are not compromising longevity just because you want to go a bit mini. Of course, when it comes to recharging the bugger, well, it's the same wired and wireless charging tech as the previous generation, so not particularly nippy when you bung a cable in it, although it's a fairly small battery so it won't take forever to fill up. And at least you got the flexibility of that wireless charging chucked in as well. Now things get slightly less exciting when you have a squint at the camera hardware, which is sadly mostly recycled from last year's Galaxy S22. The Samsung S23 sports a 50 megapixel GN3 camera sensor with optical image stabilization, and this does a fine job during daylight hours, packing enough fine detail into every photo so it'll look good when it's blown up, complete with just a little touching up of those tones so pictures tend to look really bright and fresh. Shutter speed is, well, pretty speedy apart from one or two occasions where it wouldn't fire when I first loaded up the camera app. And as before, this camera copes well in strong contrast, capturing a balanced image and rarely crapping out on you. However, in lower light, the Galaxy S23 simply can't compete with Samsung's Ultra model or many rivals that boast bigger sensors. Photos start to look a little soft with grain creeping in, while colours are no longer quite so reliable. And lights will cause some serious flaring, and it's basically just a bit of a disappointment for a 2023 flagship smartphone. On a brighter note though, unlike the Pixel smartphones and the iPhones, you do at least get a Pro mode and that Expert RAW mode packed onto the S23 as well, so you can fine tune your shots and get exactly the kind of photo you want. And with Expert RAW you can capture up to 50 megapixel RAW images to edit on the fly. And those other sensors are also the same as before. You've got a 12 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, which is fine for cramming more into frame when you're dealing with flipping massive stuff like tourist bait in buildings. while the 10 megapixel telephoto option serves up a 3x optical zoom, maxing out at 30x zoom with digital cropping. And this is a great way to get closer to a subject for a more natural looking photo, and while the picture quality isn't quite as reliable as the primary sensor, it's only a minor compromise really. Oh, and as usual, the Galaxy S23 is absolutely gushing with bonus camera modes and features. You can shoot 8K resolution video at 30 frames per second with stunning results. Stabilization is top notch when you're moving and shooting, while the picture quality is hard to fault, again as long as you're not shooting in low light. Once the lighting gets ropey, detail levels drop and everything looks a bit fuzzy. But audio pickup is fantastic at all times, great for shooting home movies. You can really pick up every word said around the phone, even in quite noisy, blustery environments. Single take is just as awesome for those precious family moments where you can't decide whether to snap pics or shoot some video. And there's plenty of other bits, including all this AR bollocks if you're into a bit of that. One area where Samsung has made a slight improvement is the selfie camera, which is now a fresh 12 megapixel sensor. The portrait mode can still be a little bit shonky at times, especially if it's dealing with wild hair, and at night you will need a very steady hand to avoid ending up with a fuzzy snap like this. If you've had a couple of vodka-tizers, you can basically forget it. And as I was away from home for a lot of the time when I was testing the Galaxy S23 out, I did a lot of zooming and WhatsApp videoing and stuff like that, and all of that was absolutely fine. Apparently I came through nice and crisp and clear, including my voice, so hip hip huzzah for that. And that right there, my lovelies, is my full final frank Samsung Galaxy S23 review. And I've got to say, it is such a relief that Samsung has finally come to its senses and slapped a Snapdragon chipset inside of this bloody flagship handset at long last for us here in Blighty. If, like me, you prefer a more compact handset, it's definitely a worthy alternative to the likes of the Asus Zenfone 9, the Pixel 7, etc. I have rounded up my favourite compact smartphones, which I will update to slap this bad boy in there. Of course, it isn't cheap, but overall it is a solid experience that I did quite enjoy. A couple of little bits of jank aside, which should hopefully be stamped right out in a future update. Speaking of updates, you've got plenty of software updates to look forward to on this thing, so even though it is quite pricey, at least it should hopefully see you through the long haul. But anyway, that's what I reckon of the Samsung Galaxy S23. What do you guys think? Have you been using the S23? It'd be great to hear your own personal experiences down in the comments below. Please do bug subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. And have yourselves a really wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone. Love you.